this edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and we are going to continue our ongoing series on U.S. government atrocities on our wildlife. And we are now focusing on the wild horses that are up for slaughter by the Bureau of Land Management. The Bureau of Land Management Advisory Board has advised the BLM to slaughter, and that is to shoot. I asked Jason Luderman, who is the PR man for Dean Bolstead, who heads the wild horse and burro program, how they plan to kill these horses, and he said they plan to shoot them, but that they're not going to follow the advice of the advisory board. But of course, if the Natural Resources Committee decides that they don't want to allocate money to keep these horses in holding at the tune of $127,000 a day to the taxpayer, then the BLM, of course, will say, well, we have to shoot them. Of course, that's going to cost the taxpayer lots of money as well, and it's very, very inhumane and ungodly, and it must not happen. These horses need to be returned to their herd areas. That is what needs to happen, and that's only going to happen if enough Americans go to these committees and shout, scream, yell, whatever it takes to let them know, no, you cannot do this ungodly act. Now, we have on the phone with us Craig Downer. He is a wildlife ecologist. He is also the author of The Wild Horse Conspiracy. You can buy that on Amazon. I suggest to everyone who's interested in this, look at and read that book. And I personally have asked BLM why they removed 22 million acres of our wild horse herd areas. And Dean Bolstead sent me back an email that they didn't remove any of these herd areas. But so Craig Downer, he was involved with a lawsuit to prevent 1.8 million acres being taken from these wild horses. And so we do have a witness that the BLM is again lying to the American public and stating that they don't remove these herd areas. And Craig Downer, I want to thank you so much to the program. And can you explain to the public your lawsuit in Ely, Nevada concerning this very issue?
To zero out 14 herd management areas in the Caliente complex, and that totaled 1.4 million acres. It had some beautiful desert areas which I visited, and where they were claiming that 640 horses was an overpopulation, and they were damaging the habitat on all those acres. I mean, it was really absurd. So I exposed this in my book. It was done for, a very surreptitious, dark political reasons. And remember that Cliven Bundy has this illegal, thousands of cattle down there, and he hasn't paid for over 20 years any grazing fee. So there was a lot of things not being represented here, and there was a number of people who filed this complaint with the Interior Board of Land Appeals, and they should immediately, but they didn't. But anyway, so, to say that, the Ely district, to say that they have not, zeroed out or decided to zero out areas like this is just not true. And there are many other examples. Ely is an example of an egregious district of the BLM in the state of Nevada that has not been fair to the wild horses.
Well, I have up on the screen Senator Cantwell's number that people can call. And Senator Cantwell is a ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee on the Senate side. And that committee is the only committee that can actually make BLM obey the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act. And I was hoping that you could explain, wouldn't it be a lot cheaper if, why did BLM remove those, that herd area? What was their excuse?
Well, one thing is they would claim that the area was too dry and it didn't produce enough vegetation, and yet we tested them on that by having another person go in and ask him how the habitat was doing. Asked the official, and he said, "Oh, it's doing great, you know." But when it comes to the wild horses, all of a sudden, the habitat is deteriorating, and they're going to starve to death and everything. So you see, it's just sort of like a big song and dance. I mean, you know, they got their act down very pat, and they keep repeating the same old things. That way, they don't have to actually go out in the field and be fair, because, you know, being fair and honest is much more difficult than just coming up with things that you think people are going to buy. That's being dishonest. Yeah, I was very pushed out of shape about this, you know, failure to fend for the wild horses. But the good news is that they can be restored. All these areas are, in fact, legal areas. They were there in 1971, and they, I understand that not all the horses have been removed there. So I think with a change in the politics, you know, and more people actually out there observing the horses and going and standing up for their rights, then we can have a change. So let's look on the bright side for sure.
Well, I want to let everyone know that Senator Cantwell is the senator in Washington, and that is my state 6 months out of the year. And I have called her office about 40 times since February. I've written, I don't know how many emails, and 2 requests asking for a phone conversation to educate her on this matter, and she hasn't returned my calls. And so I'm sure that she pays great attention to her lobbyists, but to the citizens of America, she has ignored, I know, my calls, my concerns, and you know, the concerns of many, many other countless citizens. So,
in my book, I went to great pains to create an index. And remember, I'm a wildlife ecologist, so I'm a professional. Mm-hmm. And this is very useful. Many have said that my book is a wonderful handbook, because they can look up the herds, different aspects about the wild horses. But on page 302 in my index is a whole series of places where I mention Ely, Nevada BLM district, as I said. And one thing I wanted to mention here is it came out that BLM Susie Stokey, who was the wild horse lead for the state of Nevada at that time, she spoke up and said that local ranchers own many of the water sources, and therefore the waters were, in all but a few cases, being denied to the wild horses, shut off when the ranchers' cattle or sheep were seasonally removed from the public lands. And then I go on to say, nonetheless, this begs the question as to why BLM officials chose not to negotiate for the use of these waters, especially since they held the trump card, which is grazing on public lands is a cancelable privilege, as well as what's called the implied federal water rights that come with the Wild Horse and Burro Act in order to fulfill its mandate. So they're obviously a very lame excuse here.
And yes, and what we're asking for, folks, is we're asking that these 45,000 wild horses be returned, that the 22 million acres also be returned to them as legally designated. And you suspect about 50 to 60 million acres have been taken from them.
If it was really following the true intention of the law, where they actually were found on a year-round basis in 1971 at the passage of the Act, there would have been a lot more acreages. And as I point out in my book, even the U.S. Geological Survey, when they were more honest and not such enemies of the wild horses, they estimated there had been 88 million acres where they would have had a legal right.
And so the BLM is saying, meanwhile, that the horses are overpopulated and that they don't have water. So what we're asking for is that they return these horses to their areas and also their land, and that they feed them, drop food for them, and supply water for them, even if it's water troughs and they have to bring in tanks. That's a lot cheaper than $127,000 a day in holding. And when I talked to Jason Luderman, I said, well, why aren't you doing that? He said, well, we don't want interaction with the wild horses. And I said, yes, but you're rounding them up and feeding it, putting them in holding areas, and that's even greater, interaction with these wild horses.
What they need to do, Lauren.
Go ahead.
What they need to do, Annie, is employ a conscientious strategy, which is known as reserve design, where they design a reserve based on these public lands and other areas adjacent to them through sections 4 and 6 of the Act, which allow them to have a complete habitat for a viable, long-term viable population that's genetically viable and able to adapt and stabilize. And it's the mature social units or bands that do self-stabilize, and as they fill their niche, they level off their population. And there's many ways of doing this, and it's not just the predators, it's also the animals themselves. Because once they fill their niche, the bands have their different home ranges. It's sort of like a mosaic. Then their age-old instincts kick in, and they don't reproduce as much because they're not eating as much. But really, what we need is servants that really have at heart the best interest of the wild horses, and not betrayers of them. And that's been the problem. So I have no problem with the law or the government per se. It's just that I hate to see corruption and subversion of the law. Remember, this is a very important public interest, and it's a quality of life issue. And these horses are returned natives in North America that restore a balance, and they are not ruminants like all the other medium to large size herbivores like cattle, deer, and sheep. These are cecal digesters, and they're really needed because in their droppings are less decomposed. So they feed the ecosystem. They build the soils. They seed more intact seeds of many more plants. So if done right, I mean, they can restore the range and help combat life-threatening global warming. And they're beautiful. They're highly evolved beings that they're very ancient presences. Almost all of their nearly 60 million year ancestry, it was right here in North America. And, as the Indians said, the grass remembers them. And let's not let greed and selfishness obscure our vision of these wonderful animals. Let's stand up for what's right and get them restored, and get these other exploitive interests to learn how to share, because in fact they're destroying life on Earth, and it's the wild horses that are saving life on Earth.
Well, I'd like to add here, everyone who's eating beef, you are contributing to this problem, and there is a way for you people who are not going to ever be a vegetarian to take the trouble to make sure that the meat that you buy doesn't come from ranchers who are using our public lands, and to give your money to those ranchers that graze their animals on private lands. And those are the ranchers that are really doing everyone a favor. And those are the ones that need our money, because money is the root of all evil or all goodness, and it comes right from you. So if you could take the trouble to do that, you would help restore our horses, because these ranchers that are using our public lands and abusing the wild horse herd areas would then realize, uh-oh, we're in trouble. The public knows what we're doing. We better start doing things right. I want to thank you so much, Craig, for everything that you've done and for informing the public. And again...
Yeah, and I do encourage them to get my book and just look up The Wild Horse Conspiracy. They can also go on my webpage, thewildhorseconspiracy.org, where I have a wealth of information and links to scientific articles I've written, and also to please help me with my reserve design project, which I'm going ahead on, because I know it's the right thing to do. And then there won't have to be any more roundups. You'll have beautiful self-stabilizing populations. But we've got to stop this squeeze play against the wild horses and burros.
Well, I think that it kind of harms the whole situation for Craig. You're saying now that the horses, they don't have a place for reserve design, and therefore they have to be rounded up. Is that correct?
Well, when did I say that?
Well, in saying that the reserve design, you're sort of saying that...
No, not at all.
Okay.
I mean, reserve design is what the law really said to do.
Right.
I mean, you got to have some comprehension here. Reserve design is a branch of conservation biology by which you provide a complete habitat for whatever species in question that you want to save.
Well, don't they have that? I mean, on the 53 million acres?
Yes, they should, because that was the law. I mean, it said that their legal land should be principally devoted to their welfare and benefit, not the welfare and benefit of ranchers.
Right.
So basically, we're just asking for a reinstatement of what's already the public law,
Right. Well, I'll definitely... everyone, go to Craig Downer's site.
And just look up Reserve Design GoFundMe, and there it'll pop right up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig, and hopefully everyone will do that. And thanks for your information.
Sure. I sure appreciate, Annie, being on your program. Keep up the fine work.
Okay.
You really have the persistence. I admire that.
All right. Well, thank you, Craig. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye. So that was Craig Downer, and you can go to his site or just type in Reserve Design / Craig Downer on Google, and you'll come up with what he is asking the BLM to look into. So we would rather our monies, our tax dollars, going into these programs as opposed to removing our wild horses and shooting them. Shooting them is going to be a real problem because horses move their heads so fast that you can't shoot them properly, especially a wild horse. So how they plan to kill them that way is just ungodly. And that's basically, in my opinion, what this agency has become: an ungodly, sadistic, unlawful agency that needs to be reined in. And Senator Cantwell, she is the key person. And if she gets thousands of calls from you, that's going to offset the hundreds of ranchers that are calling her and saying, you got to remove these horses. They're trampling the environment. They're no good for the environment. So now I'm going to show you a little excerpt of a video I took at Battle Mountain in Nevada, where the BLM was saying that the horses had to be removed because they were trampling the rice grass. Total lie, and as I name it in this footage, footprints don't lie. So let's take a look at that. Stony cabin
Valley Horse Herd Management Area in Battle Mountain, Nevada. And you're looking at some of your wild horses. Now, I'm looking for trampled bushes, folks, because that's one of the things the ranchers are saying, that the horses trample the bushes, but I can't see any. I'm really looking hard. I see a footprint here, right here, but it just missed this little bush here. This bush is intact. All these bushes are intact. If you get my meaning, if you get my drift. Again, here's a hoof print, but it's not on the vegetation itself. Here's another hoof print, but it's not on the vegetation, is it? And all around are hoof prints, but they're not on the vegetation. Do you see what I'm trying to point out to you? The big lie that they're destroying the environment, they're trampling down vegetation. Well, I point out to you all these footprints and all these bushes around intact. We are gathering evidence to see whether or what they're saying is true. And this is one of the big factors, isn't it? Isn't that what the cattle ranchers are saying, Craig?
They'll often say that they...
I can't hear you, Craig. Can you
say
say...
they destroy the vegetation and pull the grass up by the roots, but it's actually cattle and sheep that do that with their tongues. Because they don't have upper incisors.
Okay, but...
Rarely will a horse do that.
But I'm talking about trampling the bush right now. Do you see any trampled... I need a wildlife ecologist to verify that what I'm saying is true here, even though I have visual. Do you see any... Maybe you can point out some...
There are times when they will paw at bushes to get grass.
Right.
And when there's snow also, they'll paw through the snow and
But
break
here,
the ice.
do you see trampled? I always see a footprint here. I don't see a footprint here.
They tend to step around the bushes in general.
Okay, so there we have a wildlife ecologist verifying what you and I are seeing here. There's again a footprint there, but not on the bush. So another example, folks. Now here's an area heavily trotted by a little foal and its mother, but not on the bush. Why isn't it being trampled here? Why didn't they just carelessly step here? Because horses are ecologists. They were born into nature to be so.
So we're on the phone now with Ann Novak, and she has the website protectmustangs.org. And Ann is one of the most dedicated, hardworking horse activists that I know, that is really fighting so hard to try and protect our wild horses and burros, and to bring the truth to the American public about what BLM is doing. So welcome to our show, Ann.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And what would you like to tell the public?
I'm very concerned that there are not enough wild horses left to survive climate change. We have witnessed so many big roundups and removals of so many wild horses since 2009. Some of them are still in holding facilities. Sadly, some of them have been sold out the back door to slaughter. And right now, we need to focus on getting an investigation into the wild horse and burro count in captivity and in freedom. We have a petition on change.org requesting an urgent congressional investigation and head count of all the wild horses and burros in captivity and in the wild. Back in 2008, secret documents were revealed to kill and dispose of the majority of America's wild horses and burros. So they've been working on this heinous plan for years. Then just recently, the Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board voted to euthanize all the wild horses and burros in holding. This is totally irresponsible because the BLM makes more than $4 billion per year in profit. And we can't have these wild horses just disposed of. They need to start being responsible for what they're doing. They need to take, environmental stewardship. And this is just a fiscal train wreck. It's a fiscal nightmare. We want to have wild horses returned to public land. But first of all, let's get clear on how many are really left, because we're always hearing these lies about overpopulation. They're just lies, lies, lies. And it's time that the American public and the public around the world who loves these phenomenal wild horses and burros, they deserve the truth.
Well, I think the American public realizes now the corruption of that is rife within our government. And I know personally that the BLM is lying to the American people. I have gone out and shown how the horses do not trample the brush that BLM says that they are doing, the ecological damage they're saying they're doing. We've also documented the fact that they are allowing more cattle and livestock on the herd areas. We've gone and investigated BLM's own records, and we've also found out that BLM, under their website, if you go to myths, they state that they have never removed any of the herd areas. And they've removed up to 22 million acres, according to Craig Downer and his book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy. He has documented his own lawsuit against BLM for removing $1.4 million, million acres, without any congressional approval at all. And it's time that Americans start standing up for what belongs to us. And so, yes, Anne, I commend you. And I think that our horses are being managed to extinction.
Exactly. So people can go to Google and they can type in the word petition, head count, wild horses and burros. And they'll get to the change.org page where they can sign the petition, they can share the petition by email, they can share it on social media, they can also print up a copy of the first couple of pages that describes the issues here at hand, and they can go meet with their elected officials with that in hand. It's very, very important that we get a head count before they're gone.
Well, I think also that the American public needs to realize that right now, this is November, and in December, the Senate side of the Natural Resources Committee is going to decide how to use our tax dollars on giving BLM more money to dispose of these horses. Without any congressional insight or oversight or investigation. And they're also, this on the House side of the Natural Resources Committee. And they're getting a lot of feedback from the ranchers, a lot of lies about, oh, there's too many wild horses and et cetera, et cetera. And so they really need to start hearing from the public, because that's the balance. And if they don't hear from the public and they just hear from the livestock industry, well, then they're going to be doing what the livestock industry wants. So that's why it's so important that, we ourselves start, contacting these representatives. And now, of course, with Trump coming in, Trump's sons hunt endangered species, so we're going to even have a bigger problem of trying to get what we want to preserve our wildlife. And, we just have to do it the best way we know how. And there's Senator Cantwell's number, and she is a ranking member of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, and she needs to hear from us in the thousands. So I really hope people will sign the petitions. Just go online and just look under protectmustangs.org, and you'll come to Ann's site, and there's all the petitions, there's all the information you need, all the proof that we've been able to gather, and like that. How many? How many?
Much.
Well, how many horses do you think are left on the land, as opposed to in the in holding? We know 45,000 are in holding, and BLM's saying there's what, 25 to 26,000 out in the wild.
Well, the problem is we don't know that there are 45,000 in holding. We're just hearing another rumor. Just like we're hearing the rumor that they're overpopulated. Mm-hmm. But when we go out there, we're not seeing overpopulation. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a lot of livestock use. Sadly, we're seeing livestock that's being managed with very harsh methods that are, having a damaging effect on the land, on public land, on the range. There's no sort of awareness building about holistic land management. The whole system is an absolute mess. Mm-hmm. So as far as there being 45,000 in holding, why don't they prove it? Mm-hmm. We need a head count.
Mm-hmm. Because I suspect that they're saying that there's these amount of horses so they can get our tax dollars to so-called feed them, but I have to remind the public that the Office of Inspector General actually did an investigation into BLM and found out that they had sold 1,700 wild horses to a known kill buyer without any public notice, without any bids, without anything. These are our property, these wild horses. And so already that is illegal. And they spent $140,000 to transport these horses to a private kill buyer. He profited from these horses at our expense and has never returned that money. And we don't want any kind of profit done on our wild horses. We want them on the land. As you can see in this video, there's beautiful, pristine land all over the place. And yet their environmental assessments are rife with all kinds of lies about how they're destroying the environment. And I just showed you in Footprints Don't Lie, folks, that these horses do not trample the plants that they rely on for their survival. They are that smart. And they have evolved for thousands of years, millions of years, to protect their plant species. So unlike the cattle that just kind of trample everything because they're not even from this continent, they're from Eurasia originally, so that's where they belong, and that's where their heritage comes from. So we have a deep, deep corruption of the BLM and criminal violations against the taxpayers. And who's responsible? It is your natural resources. You've got to hold them to the fire, because these committee members, they're the ones that should be investigating. They're the ones that should be saying to BLM, we're not going to give you the taxpayers' money if you're going to be doing things in this way. And we've already supplied them with the proof, and we are supplying them with the proof, and they still ignore us.
Right. And as far as those 1,700 beautiful wild horses who were sold and delivered at taxpayer expense to that kill buyer, they didn't even have the courtesy to offer those horses to sanctuaries or to the public who would give them a safe and loving home. They sold those wild horses, our national treasures, and a lot of them were from California, and we don't have many left in California. And it's really tragic, and they keep trying to just blow this whole incident off. Mm-hmm. And that's something else. Everybody needs to keep that in the public eye, because that's one time of surely many times that they've done this.
Oh, yes. Well, in the Office of Investigator General's report, it states that they suspect thousands more have gone to slaughter. And then, of course, you also have folks that the meat inspector in New Mexico that was supposed to inspect these horses before they were sent to foreign countries admitted that he never inspected these horses and gave them certificates of health. So you see, the corruption is so deep. The absolute disrespect for you as citizens is just rampant, and they're thumbing their noses at you, and it's so deep. And the horses are the messengers, folks. They've always been the messengers to the American people, that what is happening to them is going to be happening to you, because people who are eating this horse meat are literally exposing themselves to all kinds of very, very dire health risks. And it's sort of a karmic, it really is a karma coming back. And there is a report that, I think it's the Veterinarians for Equine, do you know the name of that particular Veterinarians for, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't have the name on the top of my head.
Well, I'll be showing that next so we can get that to the American public. But it's been proven that the butazol, which is a pain killer that they give to horses during their time here on Earth when they injure themselves, that causes a very rare cancer in children. So, it just goes on and on. I don't even have words to explain or describe the horrors that these poor horses and other wildlife have to go through with your tax dollars. And it's really time the American people spoke up, now more than ever. So I want to thank you, Anne, so much, and let's hope the American people still have enough fight and gumption in them to save our wild horses. And I would also ask people to contact President Obama and ask him to make sure that these horses do not go to slaughter, the 45,000 that are now in holding and that BLM has been wanting to kill for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne.
And I encourage everybody that can to grab some binoculars and grab your friends and go out to places where there's still a few of the last remaining wild horses and go see them in the wild. They're the most inspirational animals. There are symbols of freedom and liberty, and we need to protect that.
Yes, and thank you so much for what you're doing. I hope people out there will support Anne. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your sanctuary that you started up?
Oh, right. Well, we're in the process of starting up an eco sanctuary. That's with the American Wild Horse Institute. And we're currently looking for land in California where we can have a lot of wild horses and save them.
Great. Okay. Well, people can go to the website there, and hopefully you can support these people that are fighting so hard to keep our heritage. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And the horses, thank you especially.
Yes.
The wild horses. And that is one thing I do want to add. I've noticed over the past 16 months that the Bureau of Land Management is starting to call them horses more. But they're not just horses, they're wild horses. So we always have to remember to call them wild horses, because that's what they are. They want to take the wild out of them. Mm-hmm. They want to destroy the wild. So there's a better sort of excuse to kill them. And that's just not acceptable.
No.
These are wildlife, just phenomenal wild horses.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And, I talked to Jason Luderman and recently, and, I said, you need to leave them out there in the wild and just drop food and water for them when necessary. And he said, well, what happens when they get overpopulated? And he said, we can't just let him starve. And I said, wait a minute. I said, you right now are rounding these horses up. Some of these horses die horrible deaths, as I witnessed with the roundup in Ely, Nevada in 2012. In 12 below zero weather, these horses were run up to 15 miles. Their bodies were dripping with sweat. They were put on these open air trailers. They'd never been on a trailer before, never even seen one. They were driven, Laura Lay followed the truck. They were driven at 60 miles an hour down the road, which, creates that even more freezing temperature. There was a fog on their bodies that was following the trailer. It looked like the trailer was on fire. That's how much fog from all the steam from the horses. If you and I had done that, we would be thrown in jail for cruelty to animals. They were treating these horses that way because they know they're going to slaughter. That's why the BLM treats them this way. And they ended up, 10 of those horses died later on by BLM's own records of lung malfunction. And so this is what they're doing with your tax dollars, folks, and it's got to stop. So having nice talking to you, Ann. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so now we have on the phone with us John Cox. He's a writer and field researcher. John, welcome to the program, and why don't you tell us what you've been doing in regards to investigating this crime perpetuated on the American public and our wild horses and burros?
Well, let's establish some ground first. We can go back to the pre-Pleistocene and Pleistocene era, and we can establish the wild horse. Through the years, pre-Columbian and on, we get up to the present time, and keep in mind that the wild horse is the only thing that paleontologists and archaeologists describe as the only lineage that we can trace all the way back to pre-Pleistocene. There's no other animals, and as a matter of fact, there's nothing else that can really be traced that far back. So we know that the wild horses belong on the range. They're certainly indigenous in the Americas and from the Barents Sea and during all that era that they came across. So what we have is we have the initial false premise of the Bureau of Land Management, the Forestry, and the Department of the Interior that the horses are not indigenous. That's a lie. Then we have the situation of back in the early 90s, where the Bureau of Land Management was counting horses for only about 3 months by infrared and other type of technology that we had at the time in order to do horse counts, but they discontinued that program for the simple fact that it was too accurate. In other words, they weren't finding the same amount of foals that survived their birth as they do now, which they assume that all foals survive their birth, even though we know, as a matter of fact, that the birth rate is, the death rate on a foal is 50% in the field and in the wilds. So we have a slight difference of numbers just within that realm. Then we go to the fatality statistics, and we find...
All right, so that was Ann Novak with Protect Mustangs, and now we are going to talk to John Cox, who is a photojournalist, and behind is his site that he sent me. Welcome to the program, John.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to put you here on phone so I can hear you better, and why don't you tell the public, as best you can, what this is all about.
What this particular interview is about, what we're going to discuss is actually 29 wild horses that were killed on a bait and trap site in Murders Creek, Oregon. the Murders Creek, Oregon situation has been controversial in the past because of the big litigation that had transpired over a 3-year time period. And it was found then by a federal judge that the BLM out of Burns, Oregon, told a lot of lies. That's the judge's quote. So when they decided to have a bait and trap, and we retrieved inventory sheets from the Bureau of Land Management, from their office in Colorado, of this particular site, while perusing those inventory sheets, we found that they had listed 29 dead horses at Murders Creek site.
And what did
So
what did they say these horses died of?
Well, the inventory sheet doesn't make that declaration. So we went and we asked a fellow at the BLM. But let me go back a little bit, because we're talking about horse slaughter, and what a lot of people don't know.
Wait. Let's not go back until you've just finished this little segment with the question I just asked you, because
Okay.
I think that's
Are
really
you editing
important.
this?
No, no.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just want to find out. So you went to this BLM person, and what did you ask them?
Well, what we got, we done the Freedom of Information Act in order to get a hold of inventory sheets.
And why did you want these inventory sheets?
This was from the bait and trap site at Murders Creek, Oregon.
And so
a bait and trap is where the horses come into a corral, and then they slam the gates basically to trap them inside after baiting them with hay.
I see. And then, and they won't give you the reason why these 29 horses died, huh?
No, but we didn't necessarily concern ourselves with the reasons. We concerned ourselves with the inventory sheets. It was obvious that something happened to these horses. Some may have died, but the question came up: what happened out there, and why were taxpayers charged anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200 each horse that was bait and trapped, but yet they were dead? Now, I have an interview here from Rob Short, who is a BLM employee. Actually, he's a supervisor of that. They were intermixed with forestry horses, so there was a forestry personnel that was in that area as well. Let me just go for this interview real quick.
Okay.
Journalist, that's myself. I was on the phone with Rob Short.
Okay.
There is a list of 29 horses from Murders Creek that died over there or at your facility. Rob, well, we've only had 3 die at the Burns Corral. Journalist, myself. Then you are saying the horses in question died at the trap site. If that's the case, then why did taxpayers pay the $1,200 per horse for the capture and transport of dead horses? Rob, I didn't say they died at the trap site myself, but you just said you had only 3 die at the Burns Corral in the past couple of years, but there are 29 listed as dead here on the inventory sheets, all designated in your inventory and assign a Murders Creek capture number. Then where did they die? Rob, we have people out of the trap site, myself included, that monitor if the trapped horse is healthy enough to be transported. Myself, then you've taken horses to the Burns Corrals and euthanized them because they were sickly or crippled, or you did not. Rob, we would not bring them back to the corrals at Burns if sick. Myself, so you paid transport fees and capture payments for supposedly trapped horses that were not transported but euthanized at the trap sites? There was no further answers from Rob Short, supervisor of the BLM at the Murders Creek trap site. Then we can go to a investigation back in 1992 where a BLM police were interviewing some people that were involved in a horses to slaughter off of the range situation. This is only four separate statements here, but the agent says, "Is this a pretty good organization? This sounds like something that's pretty well planned out. It's a big organization." Informant, "Well, it's very well set up, you know. There's nobody that participates in it that isn't well known and don't know what's going on." Agent, "Do you feel like there's people inside the BLM that know about this practice, that are part of this practice?" Informant, "Sure, we can't operate unless they're standing there." This has become a fact at Murders Creek. The fact that Rob Short and a forestry personnel operative was standing there doing the inventory as the horses were loaded. We find that the 29 horses never made it to Burns Corral. This cost the taxpayers in excess of $29,000. So we started asking around about, well, what happened to these 29 horses? They just, the taxpayers charged, they just up and disappeared. Then we find that at least 15, this is with further investigation, at least 15 were loaded up on a kill buyer's truck. A kill buyer takes horses directly to slaughter, and they get about anywhere, whatever the weight of the horse is. So apparently what they did with the 15 horses was get the more plump horses because they get paid by the weight, and then the others basically were loaded up and sent to Burns Corral, the other 14. So then we find that the other 14 never made it to the Burns Corral either. So we have to assume that they were dead on the range. I asked a lady by the name of Kathy McKinney, I believe her name. She was the forestry agent that was marking on the inventory sheet the horses that were loaded up to go to Burns. She stated that very directly to me over the phone, they don't list inventoried items or dead horses on the inventory as loaded because that's dishonest. And I told her, yes, I know that's dishonest, but still there's 29 horses. We've accounted for none. So, and in my mind, if the 15 were loaded to go to the kill buyers, then where did these other horses that the taxpayers were charged for, where are they? They just totally disappeared. Later, again, we find that those
excuse me, but what did she say in answer to that?
What, to which question?
When you asked her, you know, well, where did those 29 horses go that you've been charging the taxpayer for at $29,000?
Well, they simply, you know, they come back with the "I don't know," the kind of the childish response, "I know," but once they say "I don't know," then we know we could probably go no further with the questioning.
Well, can't you say where are your records to that?
Well, I told them that the inventory sheets were saying that there's 29 horses.
Uh-huh.
Both Rob and her let me know the fact that they weren't aware of inventory sheets going to the public at all.
So you see,
so this was a practice that is they don't do. As a matter of fact, they cut the inventory sheets off from going to the public whatsoever by what I explained earlier.
Hold on. What did you explain earlier?
Oh, when we were just talking about the article itself.
Okay, so you mentioned something that they black out information even though it's not national security.
Oh yeah, the situation. Those were on the contracts. They blacked out certain things on the contract of the actual people doing the bait and trap at Murders Creek.
So this is all our this is all of our tax dollars, hard-earned tax dollars, folks, that could be going towards health care, could be going towards better food inspection programs, and they are just ripping us up. They're treating us like we're imbeciles. They don't even have the right records, and they're just saying that these horses, they're saying these are 29 dead horses, and we, the taxpayer, are paying $29,000 or about $1,200 a piece per horse, you say, per horse?
anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 on the bait and trap movements.
Yeah, and right
Per
now,
horse, yeah.
and right now, folks, I just want you to know this is November 21st, 2016, and yeah, during Christmas time, while everyone's busy Christmas shopping, there's these small little committees are going to be meeting and reappropriating money for BLM. And what I'm afraid of is they're going to be appropriating money to secretly send these horses to slaughter. And that unless you're active and you contact these committee members, Ken Calvert is one of them, the House Energy Senate Resources Committee. I want to be able to put that information for you. Senator Cantwell, she's a very, very important person on the Senate side of the Natural Resources Committee that is able to stop this. But when I talked to her office, I finally got a hold of her after a year. Her press secretary told me that the reason Senator Cantwell doesn't support the SAFE Act is because of the tribes that want to reintroduce horse slaughter on their reservations. And I said, well, morally that's so wrong because the wild horses, they belong to the American people, and horse slaughter should not be allowed in the United States because it's not humane and the meat is often poisonous, and there's no way that the Food and Drug Administration or the USDA is going to have the tax dollars to be able to test all these horses for the poisons in the meat. So long story short, folks, just give Senator Cantwell a call and let her know that you don't want your tax dollars going towards slaughtering these horses. And, you know, just do what you can because it's so very important and vital now. These horses are all up for slaughter. And we've only got a couple of minutes left. So what would you say, John, in your final moments here?
Oh, I would definitely say that the legislators need to be contacted, and the board that discussed certainly needs to be contacted. The fact is that there's been investigations previously. As a matter of fact, I quoted from one in 1992. There were in excess of 2,000 felony warrants issued for arrests of BLM personnel. It got called off the night before. So those people that were being notified of their arrest warrants and then it was called off are now the supervisors and the lead administrators, and one person is even in Washington, D.C. as one of the consultants from the BLM in regard to a lot of these things.
What's his name?
And Cal had arrest warrants for them.
What's his name?
Oh, he's the second in command of the BLM. I forget his name right off the top of my head.
Is it Tom Gorey?
Oh, no, Tom Gorey is the media officer. He just lies.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what his job is. So.
Yeah. Well, is it Dean Bolstead?
I believe so. He's
Yeah.
the second in command, and he used to be in Idaho. So that name rings a bell for some reason. But,
I have him on tape saying they don't slaughter horses. And after that interview, 2 years later, yes, they were caught slaughtering the horses.
And he was involved, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Well, we have to cut off now short, but I
Okay.
want to thank you so much, for what you're doing, John. Thank you very, very much. All right, so folks, thanks for watching and get active. It's your tax dollars, and we can't allow this slaughter to continue. Thanks for watching.